This is the magicwordpodcast.com.
Hello, this is Scott Wells for the magicwordpodcast.com. Thanks again for joining us this week for another episode of the Magic Word Podcast. This week we have an interesting guest who is going to be talking about a most interesting celebrity, and that is Harry Houdini. Typically we hold these up until the Halloween season, which was the time of year when we usually think about Harry Houdini since he died on Halloween in 1926. But I thought this was an important episode that I should release now. It's interesting because this gentleman is also going to be speaking at the Texas Association of Magicians Convention coming up in early September, which is why I'm wearing my TAOM shirt then as well. Anyhow, he is the curator of the museum, which holds the largest artifacts, the most collection of Houdini things in the world. Now, let me say, having said that, it's mostly ephemera, that is paper material and things like that. So there are not a lot of big props and things like any big props or anything like that. It's mainly just books and posters, ephemera, things like that. My guest today is Dr. Eric Colleary, who is the curator at the Ransom Center, which resides inside the University of Texas. Again, this is an amazing place for the Houdini collection to be held, and who would have known that Austin, Texas would have one of the largest, if not the largest collection in the world of Houdini memorabilia. And people come from all over the world in order to do research here. And you can also come and see some of this for free if you want, and he'll talk about that during our conversation here today. Anyhow, this is a very interesting discussion and something I think is quite educational, and you will be entertained as well. So please welcome my guest this week, Dr. Eric Colleary, here on The Magic Word. Today I have with me a very special guest, and typically I like to wait until around the Halloween season to talk about Houdini and all things having to do with mystery surrounding Houdini, since he died on Halloween back in 1926. But we have a very special guest with us today, and I didn't want to waste this opportunity to have a chat with him and to introduce him to the rest of the Magic fraternity, because a lot of you have not had the opportunity to go and see this exhibit, which is inside the University of Texas at the Ransom Center. This gentleman is, by the way, is Dr. Eric Colleary, and Eric has a Ph.D. in theater historiography from the University of Minnesota. And I'm going to read a little bit from his bio on the website over here. Then, Eric, if you give me a moment. His research focused on the relationships between performance, history, and sexual identity, and the ways that archives construct and perform identities over time. Currently, he is working on a book about the British interwar theater. In his position as Cline Curator of Theater and Performing Arts at the Harry Ransom Center, Dr. Colleary is responsible for the interpretation and management of the center's extensive performing arts holding. He serves on its boards for the American Theater Archive Project, and the Theater Library Association. And prior to coming to Austin, University of Austin, University of Texas there at Austin, he was a visiting professor of theater and dance at Macalester College in St. Paul, where he taught classes in theater history, performance theory, sexual studies, and public history / museum studies. Anyhow, just wanted to give you a little bit of that background. This guy is the real deal. I mean, it's amazing, and I'm really excited to introduce. Let's just get him in here. Here's Dr. Eric Colleary. Hi there, Eric. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, well, I just am so thrilled to have an opportunity to chat with you, because John Cox has talked about you for a long time. Of course, John Cox being the curator of the Wild About Houdini or Wild About Harry website and his blog. And I know that you and he are friends, and he has been anxious to come and talk with you and to do research there in the library for such a long time. But he has said such good nice things about you that I really wanted to have an opportunity. So here we are finally at last.
Yay.
Yeah, thanks for being my guest here today. I know there obviously is a huge interest among magicians about Houdini, and when magic is mentioned to the general public, that's the first name that comes to mind, even before David Copperfield or whomever else. Houdini is in the dictionary, even as a verb. He pulled a Houdini, in which he pulled an escape, amazing escape, or got loose, or whatever, down through time. And so, golly, where to begin with this? The museum there is really not a museum so much as just a place that holds them, and then you can bring these things out on demand and show people. So tell me a little bit, I guess, first of all, who was Harry Ransom, and how did the center come about, and why Austin, of all places, for for this collection to get there?
It's a great question. Yeah, why Texas? There's Harry Ransom was an English professor at the University of Texas at Austin, and had this vision of creating something like the National Library of France, or the British Library in England, right here in Texas. That basically, if we were going to be a world-class research university, we needed a world-class research library that would go with it.
Sure.
This was around the 1940s, 1950s. Harry Ransom then became the president of the university and then the chancellor of the University of Texas Systems, and was able to really make that vision come to life. But it was also decades after a lot of these other libraries had already gotten started. So we were coming in a little bit late. So he had the idea of really collecting the archives of a lot of living artists, living writers. And at the time, also, there was still quite a few amazing collections out there. And one of them was the collection of Messmore Kendall, who had acquired quite a bit of the Houdini collection. So the story about that was that the Ransom Center, which was before the Ransom Center had actually gotten started, it was called the Hoblitzel Theater Library, which was in the big tower. If you're at all familiar with UT Austin, there's a big tower on campus. And
Some
in there,
people
there was
are, unfortunately,
yeah, probably. Yeah, maybe who are listening, they might know.
remember that from something else.
Yes, well, there was a library in there, quite a few libraries actually. One of them was this theater library. It got started really with the collection of Albert Davis, who was an amazing collector of theater photography. That was the first major collection, and it was a gift to the university by the impresario Karl Hoblitzel, who had actually brought Houdini to Texas and brought him through a number of the theaters on the interstate theater circuit in vaudeville.
Now, was he in charge of the vaudeville circuit, or just the one in Texas, or what was his relationship to?
He was in charge of the entire circuit, the entire interstate circuit, which was all over Texas, Alabama, Louisiana, through many southern states.
Mainly the South, as opposed to...
Mainly the South, absolutely. And so that was the unique thing. So if you wanted to travel through the vaudeville circuits in the South, you almost undoubtedly went through Karl Hoblitzel. So Hoblitzel in his later career was he started a foundation to help promote theater history, and had started this amazing collection at the university. And so the second collection came up, this Messmore Kendall collection. There was a book dealer in New York who had met Messmore Kendall. Kendall at the time was a real estate developer and had started the first purpose-built movie theater in New York, the Capitol Theater, just off Times Square. And Kendall was getting older, was having some health problems, and wanted to place his collection somewhere. And so this book dealer, remembering that the university was starting this amazing theater collection, thought, well, this would be a great fit. There were a lot of conversations. I'll spare you the sort of nitty-gritty details, but there's an incredible paper trail of letters between the book dealer, the New York Public Library, which couldn't take the collection themselves, but were incredible friends to the university, and were really trying to get the collection to us. And so basically Messmore Kendall, the story with Kendall and how Kendall got the collection was that he really wanted this bookcase, which was up for auction in the early 1920s.
Was he a collector of furniture or something? Or
of antiques, yeah.
Of antiques,
and
okay.
So, yeah.
Well, why that particular one? I mean, was it because it belonged to Houdini simply, or was it?
Oh, no. So it was actually at an auction, and it was a beautiful antique English bookcase, very solidly built, massive, comes apart in two pieces, and Houdini outbid Kendall at the auction, and Kendall was livid and not one to be usually outbid, or certainly not one to be.
It'd be interesting to be in that room and kind of see him, give those eyes looking across the room. How dare he? Who is he?
Irritated. He actually lived in this beautiful mansion, Dobbs. I think it's called Dobbs Ferry or Dobbs Mansion in New York, that had purportedly been a site where George Washington had helped plan some of the campaigns during the American Revolution. Wow. He was really a history buff, and particularly of the American Revolution. And so Kendall, I'm sure, wanted this bookcase for his home there. When Houdini died, it obviously made international headlines, and Kendall saw this in the papers and remembered the bookcase. And not being terribly sensitive, reached out to Bess Houdini within a month, actually, of Houdini's passing, to ask about the bookcase. And she was fraught and devastated, obviously, by Houdini's unexpected death, and was really trying to get rid of things. Everything just had such emotional weight and attachment.
So the timing was good.
So he showed up and saw the bookcase that he wanted, saw all this incredible stuff inside of it. And she said, well, if you want, I'll sell that to you too. And if you're interested in that, there's 25 crates worth of material and storage.
Wow.
And so he got all of it, not really even knowing everything that was in it.
What he had, just I'll take it.
There was an apocryphal story that when he went to the storage room, that they opened one of the lids, and on top was a manuscript draft of the Star-Spangled Banner by Francis Scott Key, the poem in handwriting.
Wow.
So he saw it and was just floored, because this is the thing. And I think to the extent that people might know that we have the collection of Houdini here at the Ransom Center, there's a perception that it really focuses predominantly on Houdini himself, and it does. There is a lovely collection of his own personal papers. But what's really exciting about it is that it's also an incredible collection of other illusionists and the history of illusion from really the 16th century forward. And then there's this incredible collection of American and British theater that really also dates back about that same length of time. Houdini had incredibly broad interests. And so because of that, the collection includes things like a handwritten copy of Star-Spangled Banner, which is exciting, but not as exciting, because the Francis Scott Key had a tendency to just write out many copies of this to try to.
So that wasn't the only copy.
So it wasn't the only. No, we actually ended up. I went looking for it just to see if it was, after I heard this story, just to see if we did have this version from the Houdini Kendall collection. We do, but it's with 3 other copies. Handwritten copy is also by Key. So
there still doesn't matter if he's got 12 copies.
It's still amazing. Yeah, no, It's still amazing to have, but it's perhaps not the original sort of first draft that people may have thought it was at the time. Yeah. But yeah, it is an incredible collection. David Garrick's travel diary from 1752 was one of the great English actors, one of the first major great actors after Shakespeare. An incredible travel diary that Houdini had bought from a bookseller. That's part of the collection. Mm-hmm. John Wilkes Booth's prompt book for Richard III, which was one of the only surviving prompt books for Booth.
Wow.
Houdini had a fascination of the Booth family. Tons of different things. So yeah, that's a little bit about how it got here. It was a gift from the Hubblesville Foundation, who bought it from Kendall, who bought it from.
And so that was a large collection, but it didn't end there. You continued to acquire even more and larger collections.
Yeah, well, that collection was massive, and it became one of the foundational collections for the theater library. Since then, we've certainly added to the magic holdings here, and whenever we can. Some of them relating to Houdini, some of them not. So that includes one of the 3 major libraries of McManus and Young, one of which is at the Library of Congress, the others here, and the others at the University of California, Berkeley. Mm-hmm. So really important collection of magic books. We also branch out into spiritualism and the occult in some cases too. So we have a massive collection of papers from Arthur Conan Doyle, which includes some of his interests in certainly his Sherlock Holmes stuff, but some of his his work in spiritualism and letters between Houdini and Doyle.
Yeah, no, there was a close relationship there, and then they kind of fell apart because of their belief systems and everything. So I would think you would have very interesting correspondence between the two that could make for a good book someday.
Yeah, and some letters even with Bess after Houdini had died. So really challenging Doyle's interpretation of Houdini's spirit still being among them.
Wow. Of all the things that you've got, I know you get this question all the time, and that would be, what is it that people come to see that they think is the most important? Let me see this. The straitjacket, the water scorcher, or rather the milk can escape or something. But I'd like to know what it is that people want to see, and what is it that you think is important? It could be, well, here's his pin or a lock of his hair. What is it that people like, and what is it you like?
Well, we have very few objects, and that's the thing that really people get surprised about, is that having this big collection of Houdini, it really is predominantly paper-based. One of my first acquisitions at the Ransom Center, I've been here about 6 years now, was a ball and chain that was from originally the Houdini Museum in New York. And that was knowing that someday we would be having Houdini exhibits, and people would want to be seeing more than just paper. Although the paper is pretty amazing. One thing, there's diary entries from his last diary entry when he was at McGill College and lecturing on a broken ankle. That is part of the collection and is really profound. Mainly it's a very small diary entry, but around that entry, a year after he died, Bess Houdini had written an inscription reflecting back on that moment. So there's her commentary on some of these documents. And yeah, I guess
whether that she actually believed that it was working, or we almost reach Harry this time, or what kind of things was she saying?
Really just about how devastated she was and how much she missed him, and that clearly the trauma of his untimely passing, even a year after, was very deeply part of
visceral.
Her still.
Yeah.
It's the thing with archives, and this is, I think, what separates us from a regular library. It's when you go to a library, you read a bunch of books about someone.
Sure.
Here in the archives, you really get a sense of that person themselves, because you get the papers, you get the letters, you get the diary entries. There's an incredible stack of love letters between him and Bess that really are an incredible example of their relationship and their sort of playfulness with each other.
And to his mother too, I'm sure.
Not as many to his mother. There's some debate about what happened to those, and there's actually a letter from Houdini in the collections that explains that he wanted them buried with him. So it's possible that they're actually
in the casket with him.
In the casket with him.
Wow.
So there's actually very few letters with his mother in the collection, but it is extraordinary. So you really do get a sense of the person. I think that's.
How do you have the archives laid out? In other words, is it chronological? Do you have them just like, here are Bess's things, and this was his career this time, or how when you go and pull things out? It's, you don't have like a Dewey Decimal System or something,
sure,
or in this case a Houdini decimal system that you go to.
Yeah, I should say part of that is that it really it arrived a bit of a mess because it had been in storage with Kendall for so long, and it had been. All of Houdini's good cataloging and organization had really been lost.
Yeah.
So in just the last few years, we finally made the decision that it just needed to be closed. We closed it for 2 years to reprocess it. People had been very reluctant to do that over the years, just because it's always been in active use, and we never wanted to be able to turn people away. But it really, just to be able to find things, we really needed to be able to close it down and reorganize it. So it's organized by his personal material first. So books that he wrote, his material related to performances. Then there's a series on letters, just his letters incoming and outgoing. There's personal legal information like contracts and wills and that sort of thing. Then there is a section of his work with movies in his own film studio that he ran for some time. The Master Mystery series and the silent films that he
Right.
created.
In his own studio.
Yeah, at his own studio. And so that material's there. Then there's a section of his collection of other magicians, and that is a very large part of the collection. So, and that's alphabetical by the name of the performer. So it's really it's mostly alphabetical by subject, and then there's an inventory online that explains what all's in there.
When you say wills, you're saying plural, as if he had one and then made a different one and got rid of the other one, or I mean, normally people just die and they have one will, unless, I mean, why? How come there's so many or more than one?
Well, I can't speak actually to how many there are off the top of my head, but certainly people change their mind, or they develop new things. And so with Houdini, there were different contingencies. There's the sort of official will that was the final will and testament. But then there are sort of appendices. Like I said, there's this letter that explains, on my death, I would like to be buried with my mother's letters, and actually also the letters between him and his wife, Bess. But clearly she wanted to hold on to those, and those ended up in the collection. So you do get that. I should say too that all of this material that we're talking about, you mentioned that, we are a museum, but we're also this library and an archive. Anyone with a photo ID can come and make use of the collection. So there's a reading room on the second floor. You register for an account on site. Within 30 minutes of your first visit, and sort of registering and all of that, you can have access to the material, and people are there to sort of help just watch and make sure that you're handling it safely.
Properly, right.
Obviously,
right.
This material has to last a long time, but they're also there to help answer questions and help navigate the collection and find the things that people are looking for.
Back on the will, one last thing was just, I recall there was something he had requested that his ideas be burned or destroyed and not shared. Was that right?
It's been a little while since I've read it, but I believe there was a point on that because, and
yet his brother, I thought, actually,
his brother got quite a bit of it, but also others had sort of shared details as well. And this is a tricky thing because during Houdini's whole life, you can see in the correspondence his conversations with other illusionists where they are sharing secrets with each other. So that people look for that in the work section, like, thinking that there's just going to be notes on different tricks. And there are a few of those, but the bulk of those tricks and illusions are found in the correspondence. So you'll actually see like a letter between him and Bill Robinson, who become Chung-Ling Soo, yeah. And they will be talking about a trick that they're performing and will actually diagram one of the illusions.
Because I remember the museum up in Niagara Falls that held a lot of Houdini memorabilia, including his water torture chamber. Long story short, it did burn. So it was ironic. It's like, I told you I wanted the stuff destroyed, and finally it was.
And that's a story that we had as well. So there was a fire actually in UT Tower in the mid 60s.
Oh, really?
There
that's
was
ironic too.
Yes.
For that to have happened after Niagara Falls and all that. Huh.
It did damage some of the Houdini collection along with some of the other theater collection. That's really what actually pushed the university to build a separate special collections library, which is now what I'm sitting in, the Harry Ransom Center.
And you're not the first one to handle this collection. You had a predecessor who was handling the Kendall, when it first came in?
Oh, yes. No. So that came in.
You're a young guy.
58. Yeah. So there was
predate you.
Yes. There's actually a wonderful photograph of the collection arriving in a truck, and the first curator of the Hollitzel collection, Betty Smedley, who is sort of standing there watching as people who were so excited that this was coming that they couldn't even wait to get the material off the truck before they were opening boxes. So the photograph shows a very famous British actor who was teaching at the university at the time, named B. Iden Payne, who is standing over the chair of the department, who would become the next curator. Frederick Hunter, and they're going through 18th century English playbills from the Drury Lane Theatre and the Covent Garden Theatre in England. Incredible material that's still here as part of the collection today.
And you've been the curator for how long?
I've been the curator for 6 years now, and so 2 of those years were overseeing the part of my job was overseeing the reorganization of the collection. And during that time too, hunting down that bookcase, the apocryphal bookcase that Kendall had collected, and was the whole reason why he'd saved the collection.
Is that picture online someplace? Do you have that?
Of the arrival of the collection?
Well, no. Well, that'd be great too. I was going to put something just on the blog so that way people could see a picture of this. But also, do you have a current picture of showing that bookcase?
Oh yes, certainly, absolutely. I can get you.
Yeah, if you can, I'll post that on the blog. So people who are listening to this, just go to themagicwordpodcast.com, and there you'll see a picture then we were discussing then right now. I know a lot of people have come through and researched Houdini, and that's what this mainly is for, is a research library, and you bring out whatever you need. I heard a story long ago, don't know how much truth there is to this, but Ab Dixon, who was a past international president of the IBM many years ago, had come to Texas and was doing research, I heard, and he found a ticket stub from a place in London that was a train locker or something in the tube. So he surreptitiously took that, I guess, tucked it away, and I heard, went and checked it out, and inside there was stored a milk can, one of the Houdini's original milk can that he had apparently put, and then he left and was going to come back to England and use it again, but it had been stored there for all those years. I don't know, like 50, 60 years. So this was back, I don't know, 80s or some long time ago that I'd heard this story. Any truth to that? You hear stories like that?
I do occasionally hear stories like that, and I know of this story mainly through John Cox, who has done an incredible job researching it, as he always does. Yeah. And I think it's been fairly widely debunked. The story was that the story was that he had been helping sort of work in the collections at the time, and had copied it, had made a photocopy of the ticket, and had sort of researched it, and found this water torture cell.
Was there something? There was a milk can or something. There was something at the end of the treasure hunt.
No, well, I don't think the ticket actually even existed. I think ultimately what had happened was that this I think it was a milk can. It's either a milk can or a water torture cell. I'm forgetting now on the details, but there was what looked like an antique cell somewhere that he had found, and then created the story to sort of make the provenance.
Okay, made for a great story. So other people who have come through, have there been some notable people who, tell me some people who have come by and said, hey, Eric, can I stop over?
Well, I mean, certainly I've only been here for the 6 years. So, before that, Jim Hagee, who's written an incredible book on Henry Evans of Anion, who was one of the great collectors that Houdini had purchased quite a bit of material from. And Ken Silverman, of course, the Silverman biography on Houdini is behind me. I think probably just behind my head.
That's it right there. Yep. I got 2 copies of that myself.
Yeah.
2 different versions, I think.
Yeah, and makes extensive use of the collections. John Cox will hopefully be able to come out and visit at some point soon. We've been, every once in a while he has questions, and there's just an obscene amount of material in the collection that can help with his chronology that he's been working so diligently on for so many years. But really, it's also we get amateur magicians who come in occasionally just because they're really deeply interested in the history, and to be able to go through these letters is really an incredible thing. Yeah, gosh.
So in a case like that, Eric, when people, let's say, just have a general interest, a magician in particular has a general interest, they contact you and said, I want to come, they do. Do you just have like, okay, here are the usual suspects, here are the things that typically people want to see. If they don't have a specific idea, I want to see this, this, and this, and they've got a list of things they want to see, do you have a kind of a generic list of things that you bring out to say you might be interested in seeing these letters?
Not really. I mean, we do have a detailed inventory now of the collection. So usually I have a conversation with them of just what kinds of things are they interested in? Are they interested in him as a person? Are they interested in him as a businessman? Are they interested in him as a pilot? Are they, he was one of the first people to fly a powered airplane in Australia, and we've got a lot of material. Yeah, a lot of material, including his trophy for that.
Is that a fact, or is that something else that's kind of become a legend?
So I think John has been working on this lately too.
That's why I want to ask you.
Possibility that there was someone who did it just before him.
Yeah, like days before.
Like literally days. But because of some marketing genius that Houdini had, he might have been able to fudge the date a little bit.
Because it was something to do with the plaque that was on the trophy or something that there was an error. They said we didn't print it right, or they changed it, or is that right?
I don't know for sure. We do have that trophy though. That plaque is actually with us here as part of the collection.
Okay.
And it's lovely. And he toured with that. So it's actually mounted on a board with a photograph and a sign that he had hand lettered. And so that was something that would be displayed as part of his performances.
Right. But he had certainly the bigger name, so I would imagine that's
he
had. He was kind of like the the gorilla in the room, basically. So.
And even if it isn't the first, it does show. Yeah, it does show his skill and his sort of Renaissance man persona, that he did do so many things and was skilled at so many different things.
Kind of a Hemingway, bigger than life type of human.
Bigger than life, absolutely, and brilliant. I mean, that's the thing with the collection. This is what was known as a gentleman's collection at the time, where people were really interested in a particular topic and would collect around it, and he had the funds to do so, and the network of people to collect things that really nobody else was really in a position to do. And so incredibly well read, incredibly thoughtful, incredibly aware of his history, and that's a part of Houdini, I think, that sometimes gets left out of the conversation.
Now, you say he had an extensive library, I guess, of other illusionists, particularly before his time. I had heard something about he had a fondness for other illusionists as long as they were dead and not competing against him,
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Well, he certainly collected the material of living illusionists, or at least certainly an elder generation. But sometimes people even of his own generation would send him things too, and he would like that. So yeah, gosh, there's scrapbooks that he'd gotten from other illusionists. There are Frilke, who was the great German magician. There was
who is that?
Frilke. I might be mispronouncing the name, but certainly quite a bit from him. Herman. Of course, he wrote a book about Robert Houdin, who he had idolized for so long
when he was younger.
When he was younger, and then sort of exposed as basically someone who had taken a lot of his ideas from others. I think it's an important part of the story, though, and something that I think highlights the importance of preserving magic history is really that these illusions have long genealogies and have incredible stories attached to them. And while there's always oftentimes a desire to track down origin stories, sometimes the quest for the origin is just as exciting as the origin point itself.
Yeah.
And really, really just lovely to be able to continue to document. It's important, actually, that we continue to document this history.
At the Ransom Center, they also have, and you as a curator, have different kinds of projects. I know you had like the golden age of posters, magic posters a while back, but you've had other kinds of things unrelated to magic. Can you talk about some of the other kinds of exhibits that you have there?
Yeah, we recently did a display of some of our golden age magic posters, really trying to show how the technology has shifted over time. So from
lithograph to digital kind of a thing, stone press.
And actually just really from hand-colored prints from like the early 1800s, which really are exceptionally rare, that are part of Houdini's collection, all the way through the shift from stage production to film. So you can see that certainly with Houdini's own posters. and so that was a really lovely exhibit. We also did an exhibit on vaudeville, which of course Houdini and some other magicians made appearances in.
Mm-hmm.
We have an incredible collection of American and British playwrights. We're really well known for having sort of allied arts like circus and variety, music hall kind of acts. So really wonderful collections there too. Some of the earliest material in my area in performing arts dates back to the 11th century, and we go all the way to the present, where we're currently collecting from performers and companies around the world. We're documenting their experiences of the pandemic. So really all the way up through the present.
Yeah, there was something, again, I was reading on your bio page there about going back to Shakespeare. Did you call it bardology or something like that?
Bardology, yeah, goodness, the sort of long legacy of Shakespeare from the 1600s to today, and how Shakespeare became Shakespeare. We did an exhibit on that a little while back.
Mm-hmm.
And again, Houdini is part of that story too, just because of his collecting practices. The David Garrick travel diary from 1751 was part of that. Some of the Edwin Booth material. We have a letter where he had donated Edwin Booth's lock of hair to the Players Club early on. So there's wonderful connections really all over. You can basically pick almost any topic in American and British theater history for the last couple hundred years, all the way up to the 1920s.
Mm-hmm.
And Houdini probably would have something connected to it in the collection here. So really, really remarkable.
Joe Posnanski had written a book about the life and death of Harry Houdini, and he was, I think, basically asking, why is it that Houdini still has, or the name resonates today even stronger than it did in his own day? What is it that fascinates you, or is that just another name amongst the rest of the performers in history and in your study? I mean, or does Houdini mean something special to you, and if so, why?
Well, Houdini means probably more to me as a collector, obviously just in my own position, because of his appreciation for history and for preserving all of this incredible material, which, just because of the nature of it being so ephemeral, would have absolutely been lost if it weren't for him. In terms of the sort of public imaginary, I think that Houdini, it speaks to his incredible prowess as a businessman and someone who understood self-promotion, that even during his time, he was able to make such an incredible name for himself. The fact that he died young, I think, or younger, certainly, and unexpectedly. Some other magicians who grew older and sort of, this was certainly the case he saw in many instances, especially with Henry Evans Evanian, who had helped him grow his collection. Evanian made most of his money later in his life, not by performing magic, because he couldn't get any work. Mm-hmm. This was the late 19th century, early 20th century, but actually by helping Houdini find things from different collectors, and by going to the British Library and finding newspaper articles about Robert Houdin and other magicians that Houdini was interested in. Houdini was paying him to do this. So there wasn't that moment in Houdini's career where he had retired, or when his career had slowed down, or when his sort of image had faded in public imagination. So when he died, it just kept on growing.
Yeah, so that's what's curious, is why did his career continue to grow, or in the legend, I guess, grow, when there were others of his ilk who were just as popular in his time? I'm thinking of, who was the popular actor around that time when he died? Sheik of Araby. What was his name? Anyhow, when he died, that women and everybody just were mourning forever, and they still talk about him. He was a famous actor from the silent film era.
Rudolph Valentino.
Thank you. Yeah. Rudolph Valentino. I mean, that is a name that people remember, but if you were to ask the general public, young people in particular, they'd know Houdini, but they wouldn't know him, Valentino. You know what I'm saying? Even as popular as he was at a time, people have times, I guess, cycles which the names will come and go, but I'm still trying to get to the point of why it is that Houdini's name still resonates today.
Sure. I think and there's probably many reasons. Ironically, one of them is probably because of the spiritualists, which Houdini probably would have hated. But the idea that there were so many seances afterwards, and that every year, Houdini would be brought back out again, and there would be this attempt to reach him. The early biographies, the early sort of efforts to mythologize him, actually fairly early on, with different books, with early different films, and certainly the Tony Curtis biopic that came out that really sort of clinched the deal.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly generations of magicians who looked to Houdini to some degree as a sort of an iconic figure, as generationally.
Yeah, keeping his legend alive, because on stage they still talk about him and bring him up. And finally, we got a postage stamp even struck a few years back, of him, which took a long time for that to take place. As far as seances, I was involved. I was a medium. One year when we did this in Fort Worth, it was the Radner, Sid Radner's son, and others who were involved with that. So I'm aware of that. That happens every year, certainly. My thinking is perhaps because of the broad nature of his interests and his successes, as you just mentioned, being a pilot. So people who are interested in aviation and aerospace or whatever, in the early part of aviation, he was a part of that. Also in in movies, in the silent movies, and he has a star on the Walk of Fame, not because of him performing, but because of his movie studio, debunking the spiritualism movement, as you had said. Of course, his performing. As some magicians have said in the past, he wasn't that great of a magician, but he was a good escape artist. But he called himself the king of cards early on, but he decided obviously he was better at escapes. But it could be that he was a Renaissance man in doing so many things so well that people of different interests will have continued to research and find him of interest, and they find out, he was also a magician, because they liked him of whatever. So, as you said, I'm sure there are many reasons why his name, but I'm just curious what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah. So just the fact that he traveled so much too, he really got around.
That's true. Around the world back when it was difficult to travel.
Yeah, so people really got a chance to know him even during his lifetime. His work with SAM, of course, helped has certainly continued on his legacy all these many years. So yeah, gosh, so many different ways.
Was he the son of an immigrant. Was he the first president of the SM, or?
I believe
he's
so.
one of the founders.
He was certainly one of the founders, and certainly an early president. And so there's quite a bit actually with relating to SAM and the paper's early work too, with the publication MUM and the Sphinx as well, all over the collection.
Right. Another obvious question that I have to ask, just because I know everyone is thinking and probably would ask you, about how many posters would you say, not necessarily about Houdini, but you say there are other posters and things that you have. How many would you say that you have, particularly relating to magic? Not necessarily to the circus and other general performances, but there might be a magician listed in the vaudeville sheet or something. How many posters-ish, approximately? You have an idea?
Goodness, at least 25 flat file drawers worth. So that's, I would say, probably easily over 300, 400,
okay.
Not including broadside playbills.
Okay.
So
what's the largest one? Do you have like a 6-sheeter?
Oh my gosh. Oh, 6. There are a couple 6-sheeters. Absolutely. Yeah.
You can't display those. Do you unfold them, or how do you display them?
Thankfully they're not connected, so you can show the individual sheets.
They're like hanging, and they just kind of go through them and.
No, they're in folders. So each sheet is separate. So you could display it. We could potentially display it. We do have a wall big enough in the galleries, and we do have table space if we push enough tables together. But it is a little tricky. We have some very rare, really some of the only known full color lithographs from The Man from Beyond, Houdini's silent film. There's almost a full set of the publicity posters, which includes a beautiful 3-sheet, and I believe potentially a 6-sheet too, if I'm remembering right. those were reproduced in black and white as a publicity packet that theaters could buy. But it's really, to have these color ones. These are Houdini's own copies.
Do you have copies of the films also that you show from time to time, like a Houdini festival or something there at the university? Or
unfortunately, no films came with the collection. But what was fascinating was that he took the silent films that he made and some others that he didn't make actually, the title cards, those boards that would be where the text would be painted on them, and then those would be shot. Those title cards were actually, he broke them in half oftentimes and uses them as support cards for the playbill collection, for the broadsides of his collection. So when the collection came, there were all of these amazing, very functional support cards that actually have its own important history. So those are still here.
That's pretty
so anybody working on restoration of these films, hopefully they know to come find us, because the originals are here.
So that was the other question, I guess. Do you have people from the film industry who come and research from time to time? Are they film students, or are they usually directors or producers, screenwriters, or all the above?
Absolutely. And people's research into magic is really extensive. I mean, there's people who are interested in it because they're interested in the history of magic. But magic is one of these things that really helps us understand society at any given moment. So to understand what's going on in America in the late 19th century, for example, a fascinating way to look at that is actually to look at the history of magic and to understand how it's responding to technology or telegrams or film or that kind of thing. It's all coming through magic.
Right.
And so, we get people who are studying technology. We get people who are studying spiritualism and sort of changes in religious beliefs. We get people who come and study. There was someone who recently was studying music and magic and how 19th century, what was the role of music in 19th century performances of magic. We had somebody recently who was studying women in education, in sort of alternative spaces of education. And so one of those alternative spaces were lecture halls where a lot of magic was being performed. So if you think of like the Egyptian Hall in London in the 19th century, a lot of women came to this, and it was a space where they were allowed to come in because it was considered morally acceptable, as opposed to theaters or vaudeville houses or variety halls.
Where women weren't really supposed to go.
For a long time, women, it was considered either lower class or morally shady, or sexually explicit, or oftentimes vaudeville houses had bars or saloons in them, and that was a no-no. So so there's incredible ways of thinking about these items and these histories beyond the obvious sort of broader history of magic.
Well, even going back to Shakespeare's time, they didn't have women actors, but men dressed as women, of course. But did women attend? I assume it was maybe lower class there at the Globe Theater and other places. Were women accepted in the theater then, even though they weren't on stage?
There's questions about that. There's certainly, what's been really interesting lately, there's a lot of research on women who collected plays, partly because they weren't allowed to, there wasn't a space for them to attend, where they could have maybe attended, but if you were an upper class woman, it may not have been as acceptable. There's obviously, there's Queen Elizabeth herself was a great patron of Shakespeare and very much enjoyed the theater. So I think Elizabeth helped change some of that relationship to
that stigma kind of.
Yeah. But that's the history of women in magic, especially, is an incredible history and under-researched. And something like the Houdini collection, which again just deals so much more broadly than his own career, is really a place to do that.
For an example, Ionia. Do you have things about Ionia?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Ionia. There's Adelaide Herman, of course. Madame G. Card, who was an incredible mid-19th century English magician, who very little survives of her work. But
hadn't heard of her.
Yes, and probably only performed for a few years, but was her posters and several programs and publicity material was saved by Evanian and was later sold to Houdini.
I have a good friend, Charles Green III, who lived in Houston for a while, and he lives in Washington, D.C. now and is writing a book on Ionia. I don't know. Has he come in recently?
I think people, especially now, people are there's a lot of material of a lot of different people, and sometimes it's a small enough amount of material for one specific person that we can digitize it and make it available to them remotely without having
so I didn't have to come.
Yeah. There's a lot of other research that can be done though across different parts of the collection if they can come. So it's not as ideal, but it is certainly possible.
There's another friend of mine, Ariane Black, up in Canada, who was living in Las Vegas, but she's working on a coffee table book of women in magic. Specifically, I say coffee table, mainly photographs with just a few paragraphs about who these ladies were and what they contributed, but mainly kind of a flip book. You kind of look at the photos and everything. So I don't know if she's been down to there yet, but she may be.
Yeah. It's really, as much as exciting as the collection is to understand people like Houdini and Thurston and Robinson and Herman and all of these people, it's also to me just as exciting to see amateur magicians who show up in these collections, or magicians who maybe performed professionally but only for 1 or 2 years, and this stuff here in the collection may honestly be the only things that survive of those careers. And to me that's just as exciting, if not more exciting, just because it really is those stories that you wouldn't have heard otherwise.
Yeah, the only other place I could think of is the American Museum of Magic, as far as holding a lot of our history, and there they do have some props, well, quite a few props, but also a large library. In fact, they have a library. It used to be the library there in Marshall, Michigan, that they purchased, and they've got a lot of books and everything there. And of course, David Copperfield's collection then as well. So, but that's not open to the public. But yours and the one in Colin, in Marshall, Michigan, is open, where people can go and research. Now, when people do want to research something, and you said they can do this remotely, but whenever they come, how do they actually take photos? You don't want to break the spine of a book and take photos and digitally. How do you do that?
So we do have staff who can help them sort of make sure that it's set up okay. So books are put in book cradles so that the spines don't break. We ask that people don't take pictures with flash photography. But it is here to be used, and it's here to be accessible, so people can come and take photographs of the material and use them for research purposes. Most of the material in the Houdini collection is now in the public domain as well. So this is stuff that people can and have been reproducing in books for decades, and we're really excited to be a place where people can do that. It's something that we take very seriously, and it's also something that we really want to be a place where people feel like they can come and do this work and to really understand and appreciate it. Not because they're necessarily working on a book even, but just because they're passionate about it.
Appreciate history.
And appreciate the history. Again, it's this genealogy, right? Of people, especially for performers. It's important to connect to that.
Well, I think we need to understand our history and the rich tapestry that is our history, and the more we know about it, because when we are performing, oftentimes we are asked by the general public about who's your favorite magician or something, or they might say, hey, can you tell me something about Houdini? You need to be able to speak scholarly rather than just, he was an escape artist. There is so much more. So I think it's important beyond Houdini and others to research like that. So again, when people are going to want to research, and then you identify what it is they're interested in, whether it's the man or parts of his career or whatever, then do you again pull these things out, or do you put them together and say, okay, we'll set up a time for you to come and we will show you, and between these hours you can spend, or how actually, what's the process you go through?
Sure.
You go online. So tell me from the beginning, how would people do this? What do they expect?
So they actually, at the current moment, everything is housed on site. So really no advanced appointment is really even needed. So they can actually just come into the reading room. It's on the second floor of the Ransom Center. They can look ahead of time if they want. On our website, we have the full inventories of the magic and the Houdini papers.
And the website name is what?
It's hrc.utexas.edu, and we actually also, and I can send you the link to maybe include on the website, your website, there's a research guide for our magic and illusion holdings. And from there, you can actually, it's basically just going through the list and seeing what you want. So if you want to look at the letters, you can select, it'll say, it's in box, this letter is in box 24, folder 3. So then you make a list of your requests, and the staff will go into the collection and pull them for you. Usually takes about 10 to 15 minutes, depending how busy it is and how many people are in the reading room. And then when you come in the first time, you need a photo ID to set up your account. You watch a 15-minute handling orientation video, which you just watched the first time. And then a staff member orients you to the reading room and helps you make your first requests. And then otherwise, it's as easy as we can possibly make it, while really trying to also preserve and make sure that the material is accessible for future generations.
Are you issued gloves to wear to turn the pages and pick up things so you don't get the oil from your hands on there or anything?
Yeah. So you are asked to wash your hands before you come into the reading room, and gloves are used for objects and for photographs. But gloves, and this is something across archives and libraries all over the world, really, very rarely do people use gloves for paper because it has a tendency to catch, and you could actually do more damage on the paper by wearing gloves than not. And there's some evidence, as long as your hands are clean and recently washed, that the natural oils in your hand can actually help the paper from becoming brittle.
Wow, interesting. This is fascinating. Thanks very much.
Of course, no, absolutely. People. This is also something that we do a lot. Is the magic community is a community of people who also are wonderful collectors of the history, and so private collections abound. And if we are in a wonderful position to be able to help provide advice on good ways to preserve and store that, even in private collections.
I know that Bill Kalush and the Conjurers Library in New York is Ask Alexander and all that he's been digitizing so many things. I'm sure he's worked with you to some degree.
And Bill's come here too. So back in the day before I got here, but I shout outs to the Conjuring Arts Library in New York. There's the library that you'd mentioned in Michigan. There's the Magic Castle Library as well in Los Angeles.
Magic Circle has one in London also.
Yes, Magic Circle. There are magic collections, and I think this is something really important too, because of magic's deep connections into popular culture and society. Really, magic exists in almost every library. So there are big collections here at the Ransom Center. There's also a big collection at Brown. New York Public Library, of course, and Library of Congress have really important magic collections. So wherever folks are listening, whether it's in the United States or abroad, there really are incredible resources probably just down the road from them.
Yeah, and a lot of it may be accessible online, where you can download some of those books and read them at home on your Kindle or your iPad or whatever, I guess.
We actually have some of the Houdini scrapbooks that we have in our collection, and a number of our magic posters and playbills are digitized online and can be viewed freely anywhere from around the world. And images from that can also be downloaded if people want to use them.
And as we were recording this, as we start to wrap up here, of course, you're going to be one of the people that's going to be involved with the Texas Association of Magicians annual convention we're holding over Labor Day weekend, which is in early September of 2021. And it's going to be in Austin, Texas, and hopefully have an opportunity for some people to get a chance to come and see the museum or some of the artifacts, and have you come in and speak with our group, as we have a group of people who have 25 years of consecutive membership within the TAOM or more. It's called the Order of Willard, and we have a brunch. And so we're going to be welcoming you. I'm looking forward to having you come and speak to our group.
I'm so excited. I can't wait for that.
It's going to be fun. And so I tell you, I always like to ask my guests as we wrap up what their magic word is. The name of my podcast is called The Magic Word. So I like to know, what is your philosophy of life? I mean, you are a man about town. You're a very knowledgeable, scholarly gentleman who I hold the highest esteem and respect for. What is it that is important in your life that when you get up in the morning, I mean, I'm not asking about a magic word like abracadabra. I mean, what is your word or phrase, sentence, or what is it that you live by? What's important to you?
Embracing a sense of curiosity, I think, is really key to me. So it is the gift of my job that I have the opportunity to really just be exposed to so many different things. But doesn't have to be unique to what I do. It is the reason why Houdini collected. It's the reason why people go out into the world and meet new people and learn new topics. If you can maintain a sense of curiosity in the world, you will never be bored, and you will always have adventures. So that's my advice.
Embrace a sense of curiosity. I have not heard that. I love that. That may be my new phrase also. I will take that as my own. Thank you, Eric, very much. I appreciate you being my guest here this week. This is great. And so for the magicwordpodcast.com, I will say, by the way, for those of you who are watching this on YouTube, we're going to have a bonus section, so that way you can hear a little bit more. Actually, you can watch a little bit more. So if you're listening to this, I suggest you go back over to the website at themagicwordpodcast.com. There will be a video on YouTube, which you can click and you can watch this conversation we just had, or you can skip towards the end if you've already heard it. And then you can see some of the artifacts that we have been talking about. So just hang around a little bit later. But for right now, on the podcast, let me just say thank you again, Eric Colleary, for being my guest.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So for the Magic Word Podcast, that was Eric Colleary. This is Scotty out. All right, now we're going to give you the bonus section of this little video in which we can take a little bit of a tour of some of the items that we were talking about. And so, Eric, I'm going to let you kind of begin and show us a couple of things you got there kind of in your bookcase, and the bookcase itself even maybe.
Oh, the bookcase itself. Oh, yes. Well, the bookcase is a little tricky.
It's not that one behind you. There's another one, right?
Not this one. No. So that bookcase, I realize my Wi-Fi up here in my office isn't terribly good. And so if I disconnect my computer and take you to the Houdini bookcase, which is outside my office, I might lose the connection, but we can try maybe at the end. But I wanted to pull a few things just to show you some of the kinds of items that are in the collection. And so, like I said, dating back, some of this stuff dates back quite a bit. We have Harry Houdini's own copy of Reginald Scott's Discovery of Witchcraft. This is from 1584. It's a very famous book for those who know magic history. This is one of the first books in the English language to help debunk witchcraft, or to debunk explain how magic tricks work. And there are examples certainly in the back of the book that show. I'm never going to be able to find them right off the fly. I should have bookmarked it ahead of time.
I don't suppose that he signed his book or put a book plate or anything in there, did he?
Not this one, no. Let's see, there we go. You can see how the plates, the famous plates. Yes. This one he got, and there's the receipt for it is actually in the collection as well. He was really good often about documenting.
How much did he pay for that book, dude?
Oh, I forget now. No, so it was from Maggs Brothers in London. And this, I mean, honestly, given that they probably go for quite a bit now, it was a very little amount of money at the time. And I think had to pay a little bit of insurance too on it, just because it was during World War I, and they were shipping it from London to the United States.
New York. Yeah, it seems like nowadays they go for like $45,000 or something. If you can find them.
Yeah, if absolutely, and oftentimes even more, especially for first edition. Mm-hmm. So it's a lovely copy, and shows that Houdini was really interested in the long history of magic. I had mentioned too in the discussion that there are other parts of the collection that deal with his collecting interests, including the David Garrick travel diary from 1751. It is really remarkable. It was his travel diary right here on this side. That is the travel diary beginning, and then he came back in 1755 and added an entry at the beginning. But Garrick was an incredible actor-manager, again, one of the most famous actors after Shakespeare, and was a descendant of French Huguenots. And so when he went to Paris for the first time, it was really important to him to document this history.
Isn't there a Garrick Theatre, like in London or something?
Yes, and that's named after David Garrick, who ran the Drury Lane Theatre in London for a number of years, the Royal Theatre, Drury Lane. And so again, sort of shows his broader interests in theater history. There are papers, certainly, of Houdini very personally, and I had mentioned in the conversation one of the legal documents, which is this one here, which explains that he wanted to be buried with the letters of his mother.
Huh.
And you can see that it's typed and dated, but then it's also added to. There are changes that happen throughout the years, and he adds those in different parts of the text and revises it. And so this is the thing with archives, right? Is you get a sense of process. You get a sense of how someone's thoughts and ideas are changing. Some of Houdini's books, for example, exist in the archives in manuscript form, where you can see revisions or changes that he intended to make in future subsequent publications after the initial publication had happened. So those are remarkable resources as well. We also have, like I said, tons of letters. This is one of many, many letters between William Robinson, who became Chung Ling Soo, and Harry Houdini. It's a thick stack of letters where you can actually get a really incredible sense of their relationship over the years, their friendship, their falling out, and even after Robinson died, tragically on stage, very famously, from a botched accident, a botched magic trick, how Houdini was invested in trying to figure out what went wrong and helped fund an investigation into that.
How did they fall out of friends? I thought they were.
Oh, they were friends. They were friends. They fell back into friendship, which was actually not as common, I feel like, for Houdini. You can see in many different letters how one thing will happen and they sort of
like, I'm done with you. That's it.
I'm done with you. And Houdini was very, very much someone who would cut you off, cold. But they did reconcile, I think, and honestly, these things happened sometimes over just misunderstanding. This is way, pre-email, and so this is obviously, the way things get communicated overseas. Sometimes, Robinson was living quite a bit in England at the time.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and one other thing that I'd mentioned, Frickel, who was a German magician, particularly in the 19th century, and whose son, I believe, was also a stage magician. This is Frickel performing a wonderful image, a rare image that he had gotten from Frickel himself. Actually, the estate, the family. There's a very famous story about their meeting. But really, they didn't get a chance to get to know each other. But Houdini had stayed in close contact with Frickel's widow and son, to the point that Frickel's widow sent a pin that Frickel used to wear while he was performing to Houdini. And so that's part of the collection as well. So sometimes, again, you can see the relationship between Houdini and these earlier generations, but sometimes these collections of letters or bits of ephemera become almost mini archives of themselves, just on certain individuals. So yeah, that's just a few. I mean, my goodness, there's hundreds of boxes of material, and like I said, over 25 flat files of magic posters. There's over 2,000 books alone just within the McManus Young Magic Book Library. So really an extraordinary collection, and anybody who has an interest in coming and seeing the collection can come and make use of the material. So you just put up the link there, hrc.utexas.edu. That is the Ransom Center's website. And then if you're really just specifically interested in the magic and illusion holdings, that link there will take you to our research guide on magic and illusion and really help you get a sense of all the different collections here that relate.
And their magic is capitalized and illusion is capitalized.
It is. If it's not, I think it'll still work.
Okay. Okay. Well, let's keep our fingers crossed and see if perhaps you can show us the famous bookcase.
If I cut out, it's been lovely, and thank you so much for doing this. But let me unplug and see how this goes.
Okay. Wish us luck, folks. Okay, there you go.
Can you see me now?
I do see you. Okay.
And there's the massive bookcase.
All right. That is, oh my goodness. Yeah, I see you've got glass cabinet. Now, those are the flats where the posters are and those drawers.
Oh no, those are empty storage files, but on top of them, those are the other cabinet doors. So as I was saying to you before, this bookcase is probably going to move again here in the next couple of years, probably within the next year or two. So they were reluctant to reattach the doors and the shelves, knowing that it's going to have to be taken down again. They didn't want to wear the screw holes out any more than they already were.
Right.
It's a massive bookcase. As you can see, it comes apart in two pieces. I'm trying to
Top
get
and
the
bottom,
angle right.
I guess.
Top and bottom. Yes, there we go. So the top half comes off. So two very long pieces. It's an incredible story where the bookcase was so long that it actually had to be removed from Messmore Kendall's New York apartment out the window. And so I knew about this because there was a letter in the collection file that said, it's massive, it's huge, and it's coming to Texas, and you'll need to deal with this. This was in 1958 when the collection arrived.
Mm-hmm.
But when I came to the Ransom Center, there wasn't actually a bookcase here from Houdini. So it took me a year to track down what happened to it. And it's a bit of a long story, but the short version is that it had been gifted separately by Carl Hoblitzell to the governor of Texas, who used it for many years to hold the Texas Governor's Memorabilia Collection, which was at the Texas Governor's Mansion. When they remodeled in the 1980s, the bookcase then went to the Capitol building, the Texas Capitol, in the governor's reception room. Mm-hmm. And when they remodeled that, it was gifted to the Chancellor of the University of Texas Systems, who had it in their house for several decades. And then by the time I went looking for it, and I didn't have many images to go by, I finally was able to track it down in a storage room in downtown Austin, Texas, and convinced the director that we needed to bring it back into the collection and reunite it with the material, since it's really, because this is the bookcase that Messmore Kendall wanted in the first place. It's the reason the collection was likely kept intact. It's very likely that if it wasn't for Kendall and Bess Houdini selling it to Kendall, that the collection would have been broken up and sold piecemeal at auction.
When the governor had his memorabilia in there, did he know, or was he aware it was the Houdini bookcase?
I don't think so. think so. And in fact, it wasn't until I found it in the storage locker that they realized, because they shared the history with them, that it was the Houdini bookcase.
So is that the twin to the one that David Copperfield has?
It isn't, no. So there were two known bookcases that were in at the Harlem home of Houdini. One of them apparently was in such bad shape that it disintegrated. It just broke apart into pieces. And so that wasn't able to ship. And then there was the other one, which is now with Copperfield. And I think, and I'm not entirely sure of this, but I've heard that potentially the glass in one of those bookcases may be cracked in shipping. But you can see those bookcases clearly in a very famous photograph of Houdini standing in front of his bookcase. This one was also in the Harlem home, this massive bookcase, but I haven't yet been able to find the photograph within the home itself. But there's several articles that were published after Houdini's death that talk about this bookcase, and the paper trail led me specifically to this.
Are you restoring that, or why is it there are no books or anything, artifacts that are on the bookcase currently?
The shelves, like I said, are on this is not in a public spot of the Ransom Center. So it's behind the scenes a bit. It's hopeful that at some point when it does move again, it will be moved into a more public spot, and we'll figure out a way to make it available and interpretive. So that might mean taking some of the things that are in the library stacks that belong to Houdini and separating them out and putting them on the shelves with some sort of description about the incredible story of this bookcase and how it really helped keep the collection together.
Right. Wow. Fantastic. Thank you, Eric. That is great.
Of course, my pleasure. Sorry about the internet cut out there for a minute, but I'm glad that you got a chance to see it.
We did, and yeah, if you get a chance, and also with your camera, just take a quick shot and just send that to me in an email. I'll post that over on the page then as well. So thank you again, and a reminder to everybody just to go to hrc.utexas.edu for more information. Of course, there's the rest of the URL if you want to find out more of the information. Some of the things that are digitized that you can view there. And also, I guess that is the website where you can register to make an appointment to come in. Is that correct?
Through hrc.utexas.edu, you'll see a link at the top of the page that says research. Okay. Yeah. And at the top, you'll see a note about accessing your research account. And that's where you can set up a new one for the first time.
Okay. That sounds great. Again, Eric, this has been the best. Thanks so very much for your time. I know how valuable that it is and what you're doing and being very busy, and you're doing the Lord's work there. I mean, it's
incredibly wonderful work to have, and I'm always so grateful to share it with people who share my enthusiasm for it. So thank you for taking the time. I'm
very enthusiastic, and I'm sure the listeners are as well. And thank you again. So I'm going to sign off and just say thanks. I appreciate it. That's great. So again, for the Magic Word Podcast, that was Eric Colleary. This is Scotty out. I got it. Thank you, Dr. Colleary. That was amazing. I appreciate the time that you had spent sharing with us, and also the time that you spend every day and going through and understanding even more stuff that you have in this vast library of knowledge there at the University of Texas. So thank you again for sharing some of that with us, and also for showing us some of the background, a little bit kind of in the video of some of the place, what it looks like there as well, and a couple of the neat artifacts, including that big, gigantic bookcase that you had there then as well. I want to remind everybody, if you have a chance to help us out financially, we would appreciate that. If you can go to themagicwordpodcast.com, there you can see a tab where it'll say become a friend of the Magic Word, and when you do that, you click on that and it'll give you more information on how that you can donate to us on a one-time basis, or if you want to pledge on a monthly basis, that would be greatly appreciated then too. And there are a lot of perks you can get whenever you join on the Patreon page as well and do that on a regular basis. Well, listen, we have more people coming up in future weeks, and I'm anxious to get to those as well. And I hope perhaps throughout this coming year I get a chance to see you, some of the listeners, who will be attending some of the magic conventions where I will be attending as well. So until next week, stay well, get booked, and remember to embrace your sense of curiosity. This is Scotty out.